Hey, it's Jody. Today we're going to talk about the application of wainscoting in a dining room. Specifically, we're going to talk about the design process of the wainscoting, the materials used in the installation of them, and the finishing with moldings as well as paint. Wainscoting comes in all different shapes and styles, sizes. Typically, we have the traditional wainscoting, which has a steel and rail, steel being the vertical part, rail being the horizontal part. And some wainscoting is just flat panels in the middle. Some of them have raised panels. They're actually raised up in the middle and then contour back towards the wainscoting. Other types of wainscoting include simple shadow boxes, which just take a piece of trim and mimic it on the wall, as well as put chair rail on top of it to finish the actual wainscoting. We're going to talk about the design process. In the design process, you need to take into account things such as drop ceilings, knee walls, windows, and other cabinetry that you may have in the room. In this particular room, we have to deal with a knee wall. And so rather than fight with that, I decided to put the rail actually higher on the wall, so it's nowhere near the actual knee wall. The other components such as windows can determine where the actual height of the rail will be higher on the wall, or where the steels go in place. To design my wainscoting, I decided to use a 3D model inside of a program. It's called SketchUp. The advantage of that is to be able to see it live in a 3D drawing before I applied it to the wall. That allowed me to move the components around and take a look at them in greater detail before I actually applied them on the wall. With the design of this wainscoting, there are two important components to take into consideration: the height of that chair rail, as well as the width of the actual panels. Generally, the width of the panel looks nicest when it's between 15 to 24 inches. If they start to get bigger than 24 inches, add in more panels. If it starts to get down below 15 inches, take away panels so that they become wider. That particular chair rail is 3/4 the way up the wall, or approximately 2 feet down from the drop ceiling. The purpose of that is so that I don't fight with the knee wall, and as well some of the structural components of the furniture that will be in here and the window shutters. With the installation phase of the wainscoting, we want to take into consideration what types of materials to use. Today, we're going to be actually using a piece of MDF sheeting, which has been cut into 4 and 4 3/4 strips. You can see on the front of the sheeting that there's actually a laminated surface, which is somewhat glossy. The purpose of that is to keep the front of the MDF completely flat after it's been painted. In applying this MDF laminate to the wall, we use a series of different tools. If you have any bumps on the wall, it's important to get rid of those with chisels so that the steels and rails lay flat on there. We use adhesives such as this construction adhesive applied by a caulking gun to the back of the MDF panels to apply them to the wall, and reinforce them and set them with an air nail or brad gun in order to hold it in place before the adhesive fully bonds and cures. In addition to that, you might want to think about what size of brad nails to use. This brad nail is 2 inches, which is probably longer than we need. It risks going into pipes or electrical work, so cutting that back to 1.25 inch brad nail will allow it to go through the 5/8 MDF and through the 5/8 or 1/2 inch drywall without protruding too far into the wall and hitting other obstructions. In the finishing of the wainscoting, we use either a cove mold or a panel mold. They come in different types. Today, we're going to be using this piece of cove molding, which is made out of poplar, readily available at any lumberyard. This particular one happens to be 1/2 inch deep, 3/4 inches wide, with a profile that I kind of liked for my personality. That cove molding gets applied alongside the wainscoting to finish off a nicer smooth surface. When you apply the cove molding, it gets painted the same color as the wainscoting beside it and allows for a more decorative type of wainscoting. process of cutting MDF sheeting, there are sometimes fractures that come along the edge or a slight burr that causes the MDF to actually not get close to the wall. And so what we want to do is remove that burr with a block plane or sandpaper. In addition to that, when laying the MDF sheeting up in the corner, there is sometimes dirt in the corner that can cause the MDF sheeting to stay away from the wall. So what we're going to do is clear that corner out with a block plane by just taking a couple of slow passes over the corner. That allows the edge of the MDF sheeting to be chamfered. And if there is something in the corner of the wall where this has burred out, is then removed so that sheeting can lay flat against the drywall when we apply it. In applying this steel to the wall, we want to make sure that it's absolutely flat on top of the drywall. Sometimes drywall has imperfections like clumps of drywall that need to be removed. So what I'm going to be doing is using a chisel to actually remove some of those clumps that I can already see sitting up in the corner. We've chamfered for the caulking that sits alongside of the actual casing so that that does not block the paneling from sitting flat. We have two options with the brad nail gun. We can either hit it directly on the face of the molding, or we can go on an angle from the side. Since we have cove molding going on the side of this actual steel, going on an angle from the side will actually hide the nails. We then have less filling work to do later prior to paint preparation. I can apply my adhesive to the back of the steel. Just little drops is all that it takes. It's not holding any weight, just holding the piece in place. Make sure we put the chamfered edge in towards the casing. The purpose of that was to allow for any residual caulking that might hold the panel out from the wall. Once we have it in place, I like to slide it around a bit just to flatten the adhesive. And we tap it in place with our brad nailer. You can see that I hit a brad nail on the surface up here. That's because this particular rail was canted outwards. In order to hold it in and squish the adhesive, I hit the surface of it. It's just one nail hole that I'll have to fill. In addition, this actual steel is canted up. So I'm going to hit the corner with one additional brad nail, which shoves it in and makes it flat. The bottom is good and flat with this rail, so I won't need to add another one there. Giving some thought to the corners of the wainscoting allows us to understand that there is one piece that has to be recessed in behind another. In order to do that properly without creating an air gap in there and keep both pieces at a 4-inch spacing, I actually made the piece in behind 4 3/4. That allows us to recess that piece into the corner and place the other 4-inch piece on top of it with a solid backer in behind it during the installation process. Final process in installing our wainscoting involves attaching the cove molding into the corners of each panel. This particular cove molding has a bit of a curve to it. Now you can nail the cove molding in the corners, or you can nail it on a large flat spot. I prefer to nail it on a large flat spot in order to ease the filling process after we've nailed. I use drywall compound on the end of my finger, put that into the hole. If it's nailed in the corner, it's too hard to get the drywall compound in and causes additional sanding. The first thing that we're going to do in applying this cove molding to the panel is to ensure that the surface is nice and flat. First thing that I see is that there's a brad nail that's already protruding from the actual paneling. In order to eliminate that, I'm going to take my hammer and a nail punch to drive that nail into the actual panel. which leaves us with a flat surface so we have no gaps when we apply the cove molding. The cove does not need adhesive because it's very light unless you have a very large cove molding. But in this case it's only 1/2 inch by 3/4, so the brad nail is enough strength to hold on the entire cove molding. I generally like to get one nail in at about 1.5 inches away from the corner. Going closer to the corner causes splits in that cove and a lot of finishing work. Thereafter, the nail 8 or 10 inches is completely fine. To fill these nail holes, we actually use drywall compound. You can use caulking or DAP, but that allows lots of clumps to be residual afterwards before the painting process. Drywall compound is a simple filler that dries rather quickly and can be wiped off with a damp cloth rather than sanded after it's dry. This leaves us with a nice smooth surface. With this application of wainscoting, seams are inevitable. Where the steel and the rail meets and the corners meet, there will always be a little gap. Don't worry about those. What I like to do is use a good quality caulking. In this case, I like to use one specifically designed for crown molding. It allows the sealant to stretch and hold pieces in place at the same time. Make sure that it's paintable, that the shine doesn't shine through after you paint it, and that it's mold resistant and water cleanup. Water cleanup allows you to brush over the edge of it while it's still wet to make sure that it's nice and smooth. So with this particular type of caulking, you can actually apply it with your fingers because it will come off quite easily. And in the process of putting it on the wall, you won't have to worry about it bubbling as you smooth it out. Putting the caulking on this actual wainscoting is easiest done with a putty knife to ensure that it flattens the surface after we apply it. Just put the caulking into the corner, don't put too much on. Apply it into all the seams so that they're full. Run your finger down the corners, nice and smooth. Allow it to dry. In any places where there's a flat joint on the seam, use a putty knife and flatten out the caulking and allow it to dry. Since it's paintable, we'll come back with a waterborne alkyd paint, which is actually a hybrid, which will stick to this MDF composite. However, since there is a laminate on the edge, it's important to be able to clear off the gloss off of that laminate. So prior to painting, we're going to give it a quick sanding on all of the laminated surfaces. Then apply a good primer and the paint on top of it. Once these are all sealed, it's all sanded, apply 2 or 3 coats of paint on top, and you'll have a nice smooth surface. In summary, during the design phase of your wainscoting, make sure you take into account other architectural elements in the room, such as knee walls, windows, doors, drop ceilings. When you're applying the wainscoting, make sure it's flat on the wall. Move any bumps or anything that is residual on the drywall out of the way. And then during the final phase of finishing the wainscoting, make sure your cove molding is in tight into the corners. You apply a nice nail filler to fill all the nails and caulk all of the seams to make sure it looks nice and smooth. Fool around with the designing of your wainscoting to make sure it fits your room nicely, and most importantly, have fun with your wainscoting.